Fact does not equal truth. Facts can be manipulated or arranged to support an agenda, speculation, or an opinion. Truth, however, though often unpopular, can never be manipulated. For example, an employer buys 5 boxes of pencils. As a sales incentive, the store gives him 1 box of pencils free. Fact, the 6th box of pencils didn't cost the employer any money, it was free. Question, as an employee, is it right for you to take that box of pencils since factually they were free? The truth is, the 6th box was given to your employer as an incentive, not to anyone else. The employer spent his money to get the incentive. Though the box didn't cost your employer anything, the pencils are his, not yours. If we look to the great truth, the 10 Commandments, taking that box of pencils is still stealing, whether one chooses to believe it or not. Truth doesn't change. No matter how we manipulate the facts, truth remains truth. Truth stands the test of time. On January 5, 2024, an Alaska Airlines Boeing 737-9, registration November 704 Alpha Lima, flight 1282, while climbing through 14,380 feet of altitude after taking off from Portland International Airport, the left-hand mid-exit door plug, the MED, separated from the accident aircraft. 704 Alpha Lima returned safely to the Portland Airport. The NTSB blamed the in-flight door separation on Boeing. Now, to be clear, the NTSB blamed the event, not found probable cause, and the NTSB blamed the Alaska Airlines 1282 accident on Boeing and the FAA. The NTSB did this by manipulating the known facts, not to reflect the facts, but to reflect the board members' opinions of the facts. And that manipulation of facts was nowhere near the truth. Hello, I'm Stephen Carbone, and this is By Reason of Air Safety. This episode of Rooting Out the Probable will demonstrate the NTSB board members, specifically the board chairwoman, interfered with the Alaska Airlines 1282 accident investigation, that the board members inserted their opinions carelessly and unnecessarily into the report's narrative. This wasn't just board members bungling investigatory facts, but board members who actually obstructed the investigation. These board members were like actors in a comedy skit. It just wasn't funny. The NTSB's probable cause of this accident was in the in-flight separation of the left mid-exit door MED plug due to Boeing commercial airplanes' failure to provide adequate training, guidance, and oversight necessary to ensure that manufacturing personnel could consistently and correctly comply with its parts removal process, which was intended to document and ensure that the securing bolts and hardware that were removed from the left MED plug to facilitate rework during the manufacturing process were reinstalled. That was one sentence. It appears the NTSB needs to learn about something we call punctuation. Contributing to the accident was the FAA's ineffective compliance enforcement, surveillance, and audit planning activities, which failed to adequately identify and ensure that Boeing addressed the repetitive and systemic nonconformance issues associated with parts removal process. Not only did they get this wrong, they used a lot of big words to get it wrong. So wow, that's a lot to unpack. First problem, is it me or are these probable causes becoming more and more like run-on sentences? If the NTSB wants to describe the entire report in the probable cause, well, why write a report? The probable cause is supposed to summarize the report into a concise idea, not spell out everything again. Second problem with this report was the statement found in the section What We Found on page Roman numeral 10. The statement, The NTSB found that the 4 bolts that secured the left MED plug to prevent it from moving upward vertically were missing before the newly manufactured airplane was delivered to Alaska Airlines. This is the fundamental problem with the entire report. How did the NTSB investigators know the bolts were missing before delivery? How did they prove this? Answer is, they didn't. In fact, this statement invalidates the entire report. Presented as a fact, NTSB investigators in that one sentence proved that the NTSB didn't understand the industry. 2, the NTSB didn't conceive of the possibility that someone else removed those bolts. 3, no one at the NTSB ever took delivery of a new airliner and was not experienced in what happens when a new airliner delivery is made. And 4, the NTSB prematurely concluded the report's outcome even before any type of evidence could be presented, pro or con. The NTSB pursued a path to ambiguity. And what is particularly intriguing is finding number 2, which we will look at in a few minutes. But let's not get off track. The following statement on page Roman numeral 11 says, however, we found that no removal record was generated. The left MED plug was subsequently closed without its securing bolts and attachment hardware, and no quality assurance inspection of the plug closure was performed. How could the NTSB prove these things if the NTSB didn't have any paperwork? What if the paperwork that was lost contained the installation of the bolts and inspection? What is really confusing is the statement about the removal record not being generated. The door was removed because rivet work had to be redone. During a word search of the report, the term removal record came up 73 times. There was no removal record found for the MED plug in the report. During a word search, the word track came up 78 times. The MED plug's removal and installation was never tracked because the paperwork didn't exist. Now, while Boeing employees had access to the MED plug, they weren't the only ones. Spirit Aero employees had access as well. The NTSB never proved Spirit Aero personnel didn't remove the door for the rivet replacement. So why didn't the NTSB question Spirit Aero's access? Well, on page 55, a Boeing Renton door team member stated, the fuselages arrived at the Renton facility with the MED plugs installed, meaning that Spirit Aero knew how to install and remove the plug. So who installed the MED plugs in the fuselage sections? Why couldn't a Spirit Aero technician remove the door without generating a removal record to accompany it? The testimony NTSB investigators acquired consisted of hearsay, he said, she said type of interviews. The NTSB never intended to find facts. They just wanted to find Boeing to be guilty. By trusting Spirit Aero over Boeing, the NTSB misdirected the investigation. The Boeing door master lead was asked if someone on his crew opened the MED plug. He emphatically stated, I can honestly tell you they didn't. I know my crew. I know how they operate. The only testimony the NTSB presented was hearsay. Even when the most legitimate interviewee spoke, the master lead, the NTSB ignored the statement. In the end, the NTSB found no paperwork. The NTSB never made a serious effort to investigate Spirit Aero because, Boeing bad. It's hard to deny the NTSB was prejudiced against Boeing. We'll expand on that later when we explore how the chairwoman intentionally silenced Boeing in the hearing. This is necessary information when building the report. Paperwork was missing or never existed. The NTSB's job was to find possibilities for who could have quietly removed the MED to expedite work. Well, Spirit was scheduled to work the rivets earlier, but the Spirit mechanic just painted over the rivets instead of replacing them. On page 47, Spirit explained it away as the mechanic was confused the accident airplane with another airplane he was working that day. A real investigator would have focused on that response. It made the Spirit Aero mechanic the most likely candidate to have removed the plug without a removal record. Spirit's mechanic, by painting instead of riveting, still had to rivet the MED plug, which he didn't do the first time, possibly without getting paid. Why? Because one, he didn't know what airplane he was working on. He said, the Spirit Aero representative said that he had thought he was working on another airplane. Two, the mechanic couldn't recognize the poor rivet quality he was sent to fix. He just painted over it instead of looking at what the rivet was quality of the rivet quality on the repair. Three, he didn't read the existing riveting paperwork calling out riveting work. He didn't even look at the documents that were with the door. And four, because of his own mistake, he was now behind schedule. He was rushing. NTSB investigators didn't consider these four issues, not even close. Did NTSB investigators find the missing bolts? On page 8, the NTSB reported, said, including 4 bolts that would secure the left MED plug, were not located. Remember, the NTSB presented no evidence of paperwork or the missing bolts in the door or anywhere. So question, what solid evidence did the NTSB provide to prove that Boeing left the bolts out? Answer, the only so-called evidence was a picture taken at 6:39 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, showing the bolts were not in place. What was even more ambiguous was that below the picture is the undetermined time frame of 4 hours and 17 minutes in which the plug could have been secured with the bolts. This picture wasn't a smoking gun. It didn't even qualify as a water pistol. Like stop the presses, a picture of the left MED with the bolts missing. The picture proved nothing, and yet the NTSB used this picture as proof positive that Boeing didn't install the bolts, a 4-hour window of no proof. If the area on the assembly floor where the door was installed was such a secure area that one had to be what they called shielded in, that is, use their employee badges to log their access to the work area, wouldn't it be difficult to access the area unrecorded? On page 45, the report points out the 4 bolts and associated castle nuts, cotter pins, and washers that secured the plug had to be removed. Where were they? Wouldn't it make sense that anyone, discovered the 4 bolts sitting on a bench or table? Did anyone search the toolbox of the technician who allegedly removed the bolts for the riveting? Were 4 bolts just lying around? Did anyone order replacement cotter pins? Did NTSB investigators ask to pull the accident airplane's floorboards out? After all, they might have found 4 bolts or castle nuts or used cotter pins or washers had rolled under the floorboards into the lower cargo bay. Or did these 4 bolts just magically disappear from the planet? If NTSB investigators couldn't find the bolts, if no paperwork was generated by Boeing or Spirit personnel, if the NTSB could not prove the bolts were not installed, the NTSB couldn't unequivocally say Boeing left them out. It sounds as if the NTSB lost paperwork, interview possibilities, perspective, bolts, castle nuts, washers, and used cotter pins. This sounds like an NTSB failure, not a Boeing failure. The NTSB clearly doesn't understand how things work in the industry. Did the board members, the ones who created this confusion, ever ask about the bolt's whereabouts or if there were other opportunities for the bolt's removal? One of them? Any one of the board members? In maintenance, my field, coincidences are rare. What often seems conclusive is sometimes a distraction. People get lost in the coincidence. Just because something looks possible doesn't mean it's the only possibility. This is what aircraft maintenance people call troubleshooting. And while it's possible either a Boeing or Spirit employee installed the MED plug, it's not the only possibility. This raises a question. Why else would the bolts have been removed? The MED plug is not a common customer option. How do we know? The NTSB said so on page 110 of the report Air 2504. Alaska Airlines ordered the plugs as a lower weight option instead of emergency exit doors. Alaska ordered the accident airplane, registration number N704 Alpha Lima, with MED plugs. This sets up scenarios the NTSB didn't consider. What the NTSB doesn't understand about industry is when a new airplane, such as N704 Alpha Lima, is delivered to an airline, such as Alaska, N704 Alpha Lima has to be updated. This means anything that was added to 704 Alpha Lima during its time on the assembly line is updated by the airline, in this case Alaska, after 704 Alpha Lima is delivered, not before. This includes any airworthiness directives, service bulletins, or even supplemental type certificates. Airlines are purchased months or years before they are slotted into the assembly line. Any one of these three changes, and many others, would be just reason for the airline to access any part of the aircraft where, for example, wires are run for updated entertainment or public address systems. Modifications are made to passenger cabin equipment. Seating rearrangements have changed for different routes or for cost effectiveness. Or new equipment had to meet new requirements such as emergency oxygen masks. In these and other instances, it isn't unusual for something not called out for in the paperwork to be removed for accessibility. When there are unusual items, equipment could be removed or activated as part of pilot, cabin, or mechanic familiarization training. Without documentation, by the way. It isn't right, but it happens. An NTSB investigator who understood the industry might have looked into this. Alaska could have hid documentation from inexperienced NTSB investigators. I've seen them do that before. And to be fair, the NTSB did state in finding number 2 on page 118 of Air 2504, there was no evidence that since delivery, Alaska Airlines performed any maintenance, inspection, or retrofit work on the airplane that would involve opening the left mid-exit door plug. How did the NTSB determine this? What evidence did they find to be so conclusive? What dates did they look between? What paperwork did they look through? Did they check airworthiness directives or modifications? Or did they just trust Alaska employees were telling the truth? In my experience as an FAA inspector, when doing surveillance or asking questions, you have to know what to ask for. For example, if you ask an operator to show you employee training records, they will show you the training records they want you to see, not necessarily what you need to see. I was always specific as an inspector on what documents I wanted to look at, often sending them back for the right documents. Now, if the NTSB investigator, who was obviously not a former aircraft mechanic, asks for records, Alaska would be like any other airline and provide the records that Alaska wanted to show. As I've stated many times, NTSB investigators have to understand the industry they are investigating. If not, the NTSB investigator is like a lamb to the slaughter. This is a lesson the NTSB fails to learn. So why is it important to state with absolute certainty that Alaska didn't open the MED? Alaska took delivery of the accident airplane on October 31st, 2023. The airplane, 704 Alpha Lima, did not enter air service until November 11th, 2023, 11 days later. In relation to time, Alaska had November 704 Alpha Lima on the ground for 11 days, or 264 hours. In terms of the opportunity to remove the MED plug, 264 hours is an eternity. Look, I'm not suggesting Alaska did remove the bolts. I'm suggesting the NTSB neither proved Alaska didn't take out and install the bolts, as the NTSB failed to prove Boeing didn't install the bolts. A word search of Air 2504 was conducted for the word bolt. It came up 131 times with no reference to Alaska and the missing bolts. Unless the NTSB used another name for bolt, the Alaska Trail in Air 2504 report was non-existent. Yet finding number 2 said there was no evidence. Now, when I was an NTSB major accident investigator, if I stated something as a finding in an accident report, I had to show the work. In other words, if I said that there was no evidence, I had to prove in the report there was no evidence. I didn't just get to state something as a fact without proving it was a fact inside the report. The NTSB failed to prove Alaska did not remove the bolts prior to the first flight. Alaska had reason, opportunity, and time to remove the bolts. Therefore, the NTSB failed to conclusively prove that Alaska didn't install the bolts. So now, instead of just Boeing, we have Boeing, Spirit Aero, and Alaska Airlines as possibly the ones who didn't install the bolts. Now, would Alaska Airlines have corrected the record and taken the blame from Boeing? Not likely. The liability and bad press would have hurt Alaska financially. Remember, they just lost the plug in midair. Meanwhile, Boeing was still being blamed for the 737 MAX, and the media and the flying public didn't take much convincing to keep blaming Boeing. So the NTSB did it again. NTSB board members provided Alaska Airlines an exit ramp. The NTSB pushed a conclusion without ever considering the possibility of another possibility. Yet similar NTSB myopic investigating happened before in major aviation accident investigations. For example, in 2001, the Emory Flight 17 accident investigation, an Emory Airlines manager tried to blame an inspector at its repair station, Tennessee Technical Services, for not inspecting the accident-causing elevator locking hardware. Why? Because Emory's paperwork didn't show Emory at fault. I'll say that again. Emory's paperwork didn't show Emory at fault. However, it was later proven Emory employees had opportunity, time, and reason to remove the accident-causing hardware and not reinstall it correctly. Emory was to blame, not the repair station's inspector, and they did it without documentation. And 2, in the ValueJet 592 accident, NTSB investigators didn't even read their own information. The accident report stated the lead ramp agent knew oxygen generators had been loaded and the aircraft tire wasn't secured, despite no documentation of the ramp agent's failures. Instead, the same ValueJet ramp agent who put the oxygen generators on and didn't secure the tire allowed a SaberTech employee to take the blame for ValueJet's mistake. If we look to the great truth, the 10 Commandments, the NTSB knowingly, or had no excuse not to know, brought false witness against Boeing personnel and management, breaking the 8th commandment, thou shalt not bear false witness. In addition, the NTSB robbed Boeing personnel of their integrity and quite possibly their livelihoods. They might have been fired because of this, which was breaking the 7th commandment, thou shalt not steal. 2 truths in 1 irresponsible act. The problem with Alaska Airlines 1282 is the NTSB, specifically the NTSB Chairwoman, who blamed Boeing without any airtight evidence. The NTSB jumped to unproven conclusions. And why? because NTSB board members believe they're not accountable for their actions. It doesn't matter what board members say or do, they're not responsible. But wasn't one of the board members, in this case, a former pilot? So what? I've seen a board member was a former supplemental airline pilot suddenly forget what the term supplemental operation meant. Or another board member, a former airline employee who downplayed the danger of drones flying in front of airplanes in major airport approach patterns. Board members are not accident investigators. They aren't trained, knowledgeable, or experienced to be accident investigators. Title 49, Section 800.2 states the board members are the recipients of the report. Board members don't get to pretend they are investigators. In fact, nowhere in Title 49 CFR Sections 800, 825, 830, 840 through 850, or even Chapter 11 do the regulations say the board members are investigators. They are management for all 5 disciplines. That's all. Anything they do, beside reading the cue cards, is interfering with active investigations and distracting from the facts. We can further discuss regulations about board members' responsibilities, but for the time's sake, Title 49 CFR Subtitle B, Chapter 8, Part 800, Section 800.2, and United States Code 2023, Title 49, Subchapter 2, Section 1111, lays out the basics about board member do's and do-nots. The NTSB also had no experience with quality assurance auditing. In the probable cause, the NTSB stated about the FAA contributing to the accident was the FAA's ineffective compliance enforcement, surveillance, and audit planning activities. What experience does the NTSB have with quality assurance systems? Does the NTSB employ any internal auditing systems themselves? Have they been trained to know what to look for at the FAA or even in the industry? As one with an ISO 9001 lead auditor certification, one who worked for the NTSB, I know the NTSB has no concept of what an auditing program does, what it looks for, how it's designed. The NTSB is again throwing aspersions about what it doesn't and can't possibly understand. In addition, the NTSB turned a blind eye to the repercussions of the previous 4 years of COVID effects on the aviation industry, the FAA, and indeed the entire transportation industry. In its ignorance, the NTSB attempted to advise, but lacked the experience and knowledge for that role. The NTSB's blind criticisms and findings fell flat from repetitive use. Their remarks have become buzzwords, empty of any value. And the NTSB ignored the ramifications of crippling political mandates on the aviation industry, simply because the NTSB cannot understand what those mandates meant. Accident investigation is a noble cause. I've know many NTSB investigators, for right or wrong, who've always demonstrated the humility to serve their fellow traveler, no matter what transportation discipline they act in. Accident investigation isn't a scene from a play that requires each actor to take a bow. NTSB investigators are supposed to be professionals who stay quietly in the background, intent on the search for evidence, not the camera. What has become the most disturbing consequence of these last few years has been the narcissism demonstrated by NTSB board members, both present and past, who've taken to social media to sell their personal brand. They ignore or take credit for investigators' efforts and those of their party members. Self-importance has led to cluelessness in accidents like Emory 17, where the NTSB aviation director stated in a meeting, "I don't care about the facts, I just want to fix this." Or ValueJet Flight 592, where board members didn't understand the concept of hazardous or cargo restraint training for ramp personnel. Or National Air Cargo Flight 102, where the board members, including a former supplemental airline pilot, didn't understand the term supplemental operations. Or the Air Midwest Flight 5481, where a board member tried to equate cables on her boat with aircraft elevator control cables. And then there was the two 737 MAX accidents. The FAA hired a former NTSB board members consulting group to create the Joint Authorities Technical Review, called the JATR, to study the 737 MAX accidents. The JATR report stated on page Roman numeral 12 that the JATR team said, due to a lack of maintenance expertise on the JATR, this former NTSB board member said his consulting group lacked aircraft maintenance expertise on his team, meaning that he didn't have a maintenance person looking at 737 MAX accidents for this report. I swear you can't make this stuff up. So to be clear, in the entire 50 United States, this former NTSB board member who made safety judgments against the FAA and industry couldn't find anyone who could speak to maintenance training issues. Well, then, this former NTSB board member charged the FAA for this incomplete report. So it begs the question, are NTSB board members, especially the chairperson, interfering and spotlight grabbing? Are they causing NTSB investigators to get the accident causes wrong? It really demands a look. Title 49 CFR 845.5, titled Board of Inquiry, subparagraph Charlie, talks about a chairman of Board of Inquiry. To be clear, the chairman of the Board of Inquiry, who we'll call the CBI, is a vitally important position in the investigation. To understand, the NTSB board chairman is not the CBI. They are two different positions. In NTSB investigators that I was maintenance chairman, the CBI was someone involved directly with the investigation. The CBI was part of the investigation's evolving decisions. The CBI was closely engaged with each group chairman's ongoing investigation, and the CBI was trained in NTSB investigatory procedures, experienced by actively taking part in more than one accident, and didn't have a conflict of interest. The board chairman or chairwoman does not possess this training, knowledge, and experience, and is only there to ensure clarity of information in the report. They are someone to safeguard the average layperson understands the technical information, kind of an interpreter. Nowhere in the regulations does it say any board member participates in the hearing as a subject matter expert or as a party member. But this investigation went off the rails. As a self-appointed CBI, the NTSB chairwoman did something odd, something unorthodox, something unprofessional. The NTSB chairwoman denied a seat at the hearing. She denied Boeing a chance to defend itself in the hearing, even before evidence was presented. And yet, the chairwoman allowed Spirit Aero and Alaska a seat at the table. Why would the chairwoman do that? Each Alaska 1282 NTSB investigatory group had a Boeing representative on it during the investigation. Boeing took an active part in each group, adding to the evidence. Boeing had earned their place at the table. And yet the NTSB board chairwoman, again, self-appointed herself as CBI, denied Boeing a chance to present and question evidence. She allowed Spirit Aero, Boeing's contractor, to question Boeing, yet not Boeing to question Spirit Aero. The chairwoman even made a point to embarrass Boeing by making a show grand show at the hearing of denying Boeing its rightful place. It has already been established the NTSB failed to prove Boeing left the bolts out. No witnesses, no documentation, no proof. Those facts were made crystal clear in NTSB Report Air 2504. Why then did the chairwoman publicly humiliate Boeing? The only possible reason was the NTSB board chairwoman wanted Boeing to take the blame, whether they were guilty or not. Did the NTSB chairwoman just demonstrate bias? If she did, why didn't any of the other board members challenge her? Why did they remain silent? Weren't they paying attention? If they considered themselves investigative material, why didn't they think like investigators? We must understand the passengers of Alaska 1282 are filing claims against Boeing because of this NTSB report, as did the families of those who died in the two 737 MAX accidents and the Air India 171 accident. Whether intentionally or unintentionally, the NTSB provides information used in these lawsuits based on non-truths, opinions, and speculations. It's unlikely Boeing's defense will do a better job investigating since the NTSB skewed the facts. And why is the NTSB chairwoman having pictures taken of herself, of just herself? In photo A, did the chairwoman preserve the integrity of the MET plug evidence during this picture? Or was the MET plug moved and repositioned for the picture without the NTSB Material Laboratory's permission? In photo B, was the chairwoman contributing to a mock investigation, or was she just pretending to be an NTSB structures engineer and getting in the investigator's way? In photo C, was the chairwoman assuming she could interview an airline pilot, or was she again just interfering with the investigation? What knowledge, training, and experience did the chairwoman bring to the investigation that she can place herself in the way of her investigators' jobs? Did she at least give credit to the investigators who have the training, the knowledge, and experience? Or was she just looking for a Kodak moment that wasted government time and money while trying to make her look credible? It's unclear why anyone takes pictures featuring just themselves and not pictures of the safety issues. Serving others is supposed to display compassion, humility, anything but self-praise. Accident investigations are about the victims and aviation safety, not about how good one's hair looks in a staged shot. These photos don't project professionalism. They're glamour shots. How do these pictures project credibility, inspire confidence, promote safety? Where were her advisors? Didn't anyone tell the chairwoman these were unprofessional pictures? And what about the investigators who actually did the work? Did the NTSB website have pictures of them? Identifying malfeasance is not something I approach lightly. It's hard to prove a person or agency has distracted from aviation safety to advance their own agenda, even in the government. However, if one misdirects accident investigations intentionally to benefit one's career, someone or many someones gets hurt in the process. I've seen people's lives destroyed because of agendas with no chance of correcting the wrongdoing. That's what's happening with Boeing. When inexperienced bureaucrats like NTSB board members want you to believe Boeing bad, understand their uninformed rhetoric is designed to destroy Boeing's reputation. Meanwhile, Boeing's workers and families are the true victims. The root causes of this accident and the events leading up to it can all be laid at the feet of the Biden administration's COVID shutdowns, when all the major airlines parked their planes. Paranoia ruled the industry, and upper managers everywhere made employees work from home. The Biden administration prevented the FAA from performing required oversight in the United States and abroad because of COVID idiocy. FAA inspectors like me wanted to conduct surveillance, keep up our oversight, but our leadership whined about COVID. Meanwhile, the manufacturers like Boeing and airlines like Alaska suspended normal internal and external quality assurance programs, as well as required oversight of their contractors because of absurdities like mask restrictions. Apparently, the NTSB missed those years. Starting in 2021, former Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg's failure to allow the airlines, manufacturers, and FAA to conduct themselves professionally and responsibly during COVID lockdowns ensured those directly contributing to aviation safety were standing down. How soon we've forgotten. Furthermore, Buttigieg drove the dangerous diversity, equity, and inclusion catastrophe that infested government agencies and the airlines with unqualified managers, who in turn hired more useless DEI candidates. The DEI propaganda effect will continue to cripple aviation for decades to come. Unfortunately, the NTSB will not call out this DEI disaster. And last but not least, the United States Congress owns much of the blame for the events leading up to Alaska Airlines Flight 1282. This should have been an easy one for the NTSB to discover. Instead, the NTSB board members chose to use the NTSB as a bully pulpit to beat the death the FAA is to blame narrative, while ignoring the obvious damage the Congress continues to do to the FAA with the political virus called continuing resolutions. Today's NTSB board members stand on the shoulders of even less effective board members of the past who oversaw other useless nonsense, like the ValueJet Flight 592 debacle. The NTSB continues to follow their board members' lead as if they're stacking deck chairs on the Titanic. Did the NTSB and Accident Report Air 2504 distort the facts? The NTSB altered the facts by presenting some facts as fiction. But as Ralph Waldo Emerson once said, fiction reveals truths that reality obscures. In other words, the NTSB can spin the tale the way they want, but in the end, the truth will come out. As for me, I'll continue bringing you the truth. Until next time, I'm Stephen Carbone reminding you to tab. Think safe, act safe, be safe. Take care.